Dispatchers of Reddit, what calls have you taken on the non-emergency line that definitely was an emergency? Had a guy tell me he is on his way to ER and asked if we have a wheelchair waiting for him because he thinks he will pass out as soon as he shows up. Turns out he cut his hand clean off and was driving one-handed, bleeding all over the place to ER. Dude even picked up his hand and put it in his jacket pocket. One of my instructors in AIT told us a story about how they were responding to a call where the patient was complaining about chest pain. For obvious reasons, he and the other EMTs were preparing for some sort of cardiac issue. They get to the scene just to find out that the patient's chest pain was due to the gunshot wound in his chest. This technically doesn't fit your criteria, since chest pain is also an emergency, but I figured it fit well enough. Last night someone called our non-emergency line because one of their family members wasn't breathing at all. Got a little blindsided by that one. Not a dispatcher, but got a call about a noise disturbance from a farm at the edge of city limits. Turns out a party had gotten hijacked by a tweaker who thought it was a good idea to break into a house full of teenagers. Turned into a 3-hour hostage situation. Guy crashed when the drugs left his system. Nobody got hurt. One time I called 411 because a guy had a handsaw and was cutting down a tree along the sidewalk of Clark Street in Chicago. The 411 operator said she was connecting me to 911 and I tried to say it wasn't a big deal. Just send someone when you can, etc. She interrupted, "You're telling me that a man with saw is on Clark Street and showing signs of being nuts?" Yup, 911 please. Not a dispatcher, but I called about a lost dog near the beach one summer. The dispatcher asked if it had a collar, what breed it was, etc., and we eventually realized it was a coyote. For bonus points, when animal control and the cops showed up they told me it had rabies. Thankfully it was early enough, nobody was at the beach yet. Not a dispatcher but a paramedic. We got a call for a fall and the patient only needed help up. Per dispatch notes, reporting party said patient was breathing, conscious, and was at her normal mental status. We didn't run lights and sirens due to no apparent life threats and the relatively short distance, under 2 miles with light traffic. Get inside, patient is having a full-blown stroke. She is unresponsive and was struggling to breathe. The wall right next to her head had a hole that busted through the drywall. Patient ended up having a hemorrhagic stroke, and it was believed to have happened when she hit the wall. We took her home on hospice a few days later. Still annoys me to this day about the whole situation, but you live and you learn. However, there is not much we or the hospital could have done. Family honored her wishes and asked for comfort measures. A friend and I were walking my dog past a local elementary school over winter break when we thought we heard a fire alarm ringing and faintly smelled smoke. We figured we were both just over imaginative since nobody was around or seemed to be concerned. An hour later, as we were walking back, we passed the elementary school again and the alarm and the smoke smell were still there. We decided to call the non-emergency line since nobody else in the surrounding neighborhood seemed to have noticed anything and we didn't want to look like teenagers pulling a prank. Operator answered and after we explained it to her she said, "Wait, you're telling me you think an elementary school has been on fire for the past hour and you didn't consider that an emergency? The fire was pretty small and there was no structural damage, but yeah, that was not a smart moment." I've never even told my mother that I'm one of the unnamed sources that alerted the authorities to a fire in a local elementary school. It is a secret my dog and I will take to our graves. I used to work for 111, which is a non-emergency medical line here in the UK. I once had a call from a carer for an elderly lady who was wheelchair bound and pretty much immobile. Upon taking the call, one of the first questions I ask is, "Can I possibly speak to the patient?" Which is normally a quick yes or no. The carer ummed for a good couple of minutes before deciding no, I couldn't speak to the patient. Her reasoning? The patient couldn't breathe and was turning blue. Almost 10 years in 911 here. I think it's about a 50/50 split for emergencies take on 911 lines versus non-emergency admin lines. Shock does really weird things to people. And some people panic and call in emergencies that aren't emergencies to any rational person, but the caller isn't thinking rationally. I've taken calls for suicide by firearm, revolver accidents, and house fires on non-emergent lines only to turn around and answer a 911 line for something like my neighbor's dogs are barking and won't shut up. There are plenty of times that people call in underestimating the severity of the patient's symptoms, but what's more frustrating is when people call a non-emergency line and immediately demand an ambulance. It's like, you know what the emergency number is. If you think it's an emergency, call them, you dimwit. Not a dispatcher, but I was the caller. I was sitting at a stop sign in my small town waiting for a semi-truck to finish going through the intersection. The trailer caught a power line, bringing it down onto my vehicle in a way that prevented me from just driving away and letting it slide off. I called the non-emergency line, where I was told to hang up, call 911, and not touch anything in the vehicle that I could avoid touching, obviously. Fire truck showed up and used some type of insulated pole with a ground attached as a secondary measure to pull the line off of my vehicle. I drove a short distance to a safe area and gave a statement to police with the truck's DOT and trailer plate number while the MC shut off the line. I work in emergency road service. I got a call for a lockout where a disabled woman was locked inside her car because of electrical issues. Because she had some kind of electronic assistance for getting in or out of the car and the car was dead. She was stuck. It was snowing to beat the band and non-emergency response times were 4 hours. It was 20 degrees out. I told her to call 911 and she absolutely refused to do it. I'm a firefighter and numerous times people will just call to the station to report an emergency. We still have to tell them to call 911 because we're not allowed to self-dispatch. It's usually old people. It's not an emergency, but I fell 10 hours ago and have just now been able to crawl to the phone. Just need some help getting up. On and please. Don't have them using all their lights and sirens. I don't want to wake the neighbors, or I'm just having chest pain and can't really breathe right. Just want someone to come check me out. Or my husband hasn't been able to have a bowel movement in a while and now he's having really bad stomach pains. They usually downplay things that can go really bad for them really fast. I think they feel embarrassed or like they don't want to be a nuisance. Got a non-emergency call from a mother telling me her daughter, who was home alone, called her mom and said that someone just kicked in her front door and she was hiding under her bed with the person roaming through the house. So I dispatch all my units in which they get there in about 2 minutes and just turned out that it was the landlord that gave 24-hour notice to come fix a light. Definitely an emergency that turned out to be nothing. Mom should have called 911 in that situation. I've taken many legit emergencies on the non-emergency line. Most memorable was a lady who shot her husband and just called us to collect the body. What always shocked me was when it was busy and I would ask, is this an emergency or can you hold? People would always say they could hold, but then have legit emergencies. Like, no, your stab wound cannot hold. I often found that in shock people tend to get hyper focused on one detail and leave out vital ones. Actually a dispatcher. Entire company was BLS, so generally only non-emergencies. Caller called to say that a man was attacking a woman outside. What she meant to say was that the man had attached screwdrivers to a glove Wolverine style and was punching this woman in the face, leaving perfect circle holes all over her face. All for her purse at 5 in the morning. She survived. Once a man tried to climb in my bedroom window. At the time I had a really old bed that was always coming apart, so I pulled the leg off and scared him away with it. Then I called the non-emergency number because he was already gone. There was a helicopter overhead and the cop cars at my door in less than a minute and the dispatcher was like, next time you can just call 911. A family called in because the elderly grandmother had injured her leg. They couldn't quite describe how it happened, but somehow, this poor lady's femur was broken and sticking out of the skin. Evidently this led to charges for elder abuse or neglect, and I can only guess they called the non-emergency line to downplay the severity. Obligatory, not a dispatcher, but there was a truck that wrecked out in a field near my house, likely while messing around in the hills. I called a non-emergency line and the dispatcher asked me to get closer to see if there was anyone in it. There was 2 guys in it. They lived, but it was definitely a scary thing for me at the time. Notice most of the responses are from the UK. We really do have a monopoly on understatement. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Let us know your thoughts on this topic. See you soon.